Well, hello members, this is LA and this is the Cradle-to-Grave series where we look at particular stocks and watch them from the beginning of a trade until the end of a trade and monitor them to see what's happening. I'm going to start with Equifax because we got to bring this up to date. I've made a few changes, as you know, in the portfolio that I've communicated to you, but I want to bring it visually now for you to see it. The first thing is the last time we talked about Equifax, and we talked about, the fact that we'd had this nice big run higher. And now that we have that, the question is what is it going to do next, right? So you get a nice big straight move, a little bit more. But then we came off with volume, and I mentioned this last time. I didn't like to see that. And when we spiked back up into it right here, right? Volume comparison, very bad. And as you spike into it, right, you can't hold price. It's a hanging man. You get a little bit of a push back up, push down now, and it looks to me like it's going to come down and test this swing point low now. So what we did is we pushed out of this thing on a little bit of a bounce and just took our money. We had good profits in it. We'd already taken some higher. We took the rest of it out. I think that's the right trade. Now, if we look at it longer term, we don't want to forget about this because I think longer term, this is probably a stock that you want to keep on your radar screen. And so when I look at it here, on the weekly time frame, you got this big push up here, this bar, and I'll just kind of circle these as we go, or point them out, I guess. We got this big bar here, right? Volume here, we got volume there, and all the rest of the volume's down in this area. So you've got multiple things. Let's talk about them one at a time. Retest, regen, right? Bullish, right? Once you break out, you get a little bit of a retest, and so this would be the second time back on that retest. And so if we come back, right, the odds are not quite as great, but you've had a nice run. So my guess is if it came back into this area, it'd probably hold the first time, especially if it came back with no volume. The second thing is on this time frame, right, is you have these two big volume bars. And if you look at those two volume bars, we're looking at this bar and the volume bar over here, which is this bar. There's a congruent area between those two, right? And actually it's not congruent, it's actually an overlap. That overlap is going to provide some support too, I think right at the bottom of it, right where you see the green begin on your screen. And so I think that 120 level is a nice spot to think about this thing. Now 120 from 132, which is where it is now, it's quite a ways down. And I don't think most people are thinking that big of a retrace, but you know what? If we get that kind of a retrace, we may want to come back in and revisit this with a buy in that area, another potential buy in this area. It depends on how, of course, it comes back. And so anyway, we'll be watching this. Long term, you can't argue with this stock. I mean, it's a long-term winner. It's just made its run. Now it wants to consolidate again. And so you just have to take it off your list, or take it off your invested list and just wait, right? And then catch a retrace and do your thing again. Some people prefer to just hold it. I think the best thing to do is take your money and then come back in. So that's Equifax. Let's look at the next one. Now, the next one is gold. We have run with gold all the way up, big, huge, long run. We actually have to move to a weekly to even see it. It was back when it was breaking out here. And when it did, right, we got on the bandwagon and we rode this thing up. And we had about 7-8% profit on a very large position. We took some of that off. And I'm going to go back to the daily chart and outline that. And so what happened here is I've indicated already that I believe that this thing is going to trend sideways instead of up again. You had a gap down, volume expands, right? Then you push back up into that gap, this area here. Matter of fact, I think we took it out, took our profits in this bar. But you had a gap up, and then you got an outside bearish reversal. Right, so that again is a bad sign, and the volume also was a little bit heavier. So now you go back up, you test it again, right? You're testing this little ledge right here, and again you can't get over it. This is going to come test this ledge now, right? The little bottom of these, probably break it, and then come back into this area. It's going to come back to test this bar, probably the bottom of that bar. That's where you want to think about potentially buying it. Now, if you think about it in another way, this could be potentially a neckline forming in this area, right? So we could have a neckline. We'll draw it in as a neckline. Let's just say that price comes back to this area somewhere. That might be where the neckline is. And I'm going back to classical TA because I'm pretty sure that once you see this and now this, right, people are going to start talking about a head and shoulders top. Now, head and shoulders tops where you really have to get worried are not on the daily time frame. They're on the weekly time frame because then that would mean something a little bit bigger. But people love to look at the dailies and they're going to see this. And if it starts to break down, they're going to say, oh, top's in, you got to get out, right? And if that in fact does happen, you could get a larger retrace. And why is that? Well, because if we look over here on the weekly time frame and bring this back, on the weekly time frame, we actually had the breakout here. Let's point these out as we go. So you had the breakout bar here. You can see the trend transition, right? That broke over this swing point high. As it gets over it, right, it retraces. And what does it do? It does a full retest, regenerate, gets under it, but only stays there a bar, and then jumps right back through it and runs it to the top. And now we're consolidating again. And all that volume came in here. This was all off the Brexit news as well. And you had the big spike up, now push back, now a little bounce, and it looks like it's trying to come back in again. I would not be at all surprised to see it come back into this retest regenerate zone again, test it again, which would also bring it back into this larger bar, which is where the volume is. Now, if you want to look at it a different way, you actually have breakouts back here that have never been tested. So in other words, if I do a bullish retest regenerate here, there was never a test of that zone. And so a pushback, and it would be one heck of a pushback if it came all the way down to here. But a pullback into this area, believe me, everybody be jumping ship. They'd be telling us that this gold run is over, that it was all a fake out, blah, blah, blah. But you know, that might actually end up being the best time to buy this if it even were to come that deep. And the reason for that is if you look at the monthly chart, this thing really does look like it's made a turn. And you see a trend transition here to sideways. That doesn't guarantee it, but overall, I mean, this is a pretty positive picture. I mean, I can look at this, I can see, you know, we had all of this going on here. You get the big push down, then you trend down. Now you make a nice spike and volume rises. Now, many times in a this was 3 years of this, many times that big of a change, right, you'll get a deeper retrace because those people that made the fast money are going to bail. And where could this retrace to on this time frame? Well, you've certainly got a little ledge here, right, the overlap of these two areas, and that's where the big support starts to come in underneath it. And so when I look at this, the two logical places to think about it is one is that zone, which is about 115. And if I go back now to that weekly, and I was talking about 112, right? I was talking about this breakout. That top is 114 actually. That's almost the same area when you look at it on the monthly. And so you could see it come back into this area, test that area again, which would be the test on the weekly. And that might be the ideal spot to pick this back up. Now, are you going to just stay in it and ride that down? No. Are you going to buy it when it's there? Probably not, especially if you still have some. And so, you know, what I was saying this morning is don't get too top heavy. In other words, don't be accumulating up here. You did your accumulating in this price point, sell some, right? And I'm going to go back to the weekly now. And if it ends up not being that deep, what we're going to want to do is buy some of this at key points depending on how it acts. Because there really is a range here, right? It's actually about that. And then you have the one on top of it. If this starts to break this higher range and get into this bottom range, right, or even if it just tests this one more time, there may be a buy right into that area on these two bars. So maybe right into there. So we just want to watch it as it comes back. I'm assuming it is going to at least range, potentially break back down in this lower range. And I think we're going to have better buys as a result. So my focus right now is letting gold pull back. You can hedge it with GLL, or you can just sit with it, sell some of it off with the ideal of making the position even larger going forward. Finally, let's bring our attention to Alibaba, right? Got the nice big spike up. In case you didn't watch the previous one, you can go back and look at it if you want, but essentially we started buying it back here. We added on the breakout day, that was earnings. You got the nice big spike in volume. Now a lot of times this will end up, you know, you'll see a big move, right, and a huge volume spurt end up being a range type setup. But I don't think this one actually is. I think it's just simply hitting resistance and waiting. And the reason it's doing that, we have to go to other time frames. I'm going to go to the monthly time frame and show you that. If you come over here and look at the monthly time frame, it's fairly obvious that the volume's here, right? Take that low, draw it across. Where is it? It's right where we've come to. It's right in that $9,800, about 99 actually. That's what's happening, right? This thing shot up to 98.86. That low was 99.05. Gets up there. Anyone that bought early on the BABA IPO, they're selling into this. How big is that supply line? Well, we don't know that, but I suspect it's going to get eaten up, and potentially this could pull back some, but I suspect it's going to get eaten up, and this thing is eventually going to trade to the top of this big volume bar. Once it gets into it deep enough, right, then it will try to trade to the top. And so that's the bigger trade. If we bring it back now on the daily, actually let's go to the weekly. If we bring it back to the weekly, there's an outside chance this thing could trade back to do a retest regen on this time frame. And actually the bullish retest regen would be this full thing, but you've got 3 swing point highs that it was tested into. So I suspect that's going to be good support if it gets back there. But I don't think it's going to get that deep. And when you look at the volumes here, right, they're not huge. So I think that, you know, that ideal that it's a range trade is probably not the case. And more than likely, this thing is simply hesitating before, as it eats up that supply line, hesitating, and eventually is going to try to make a move higher. So that's the BABA trade. And maybe next week we'll pick up another one. As you know, we did pick up BHI on the same sort of multiple swing point breakouts, and that one's looking pretty good as well. Maybe we'll pick that one up going forward. That is it. Thanks, and take care.